Okay, as Karen mentioned earlier, we're in the midst of our 7-week fall series, week number 3, working with this book up here, Spiritual Economics by Eric Butterworth, The Principles and Process of True Prosperity. Today we're talking about some of the ideas he writes about in chapters 2 and 3, which are on the law of visualization and the power of belief, or perhaps it might be more accurate to say his ideas on the misuse of the law of visualization and the power of belief. Eric has always been a strong voice warning us to beware of consumerism and materialism masquerading as spirituality. Now, last week I mentioned something called the prosperity gospel. You might have heard of that. Entire churches today built around the idea that God wants you to be rich. Time magazine wrote a whole article about it. Does God want you to be rich? Yes, say some megachurches. Others call it heresy, the debate over the new gospel of wealth. And it's all about, when they talk about riches, it's pretty materialistic. They're talking about money. You've seen the churches. They look like shopping malls, right? They have services on Sunday that are like a cross between a Broadway show and a Las Vegas review. And the idea here is that the more wealthy and opulent that you appear to be on the outside, the more it means that you have found favor with God. And that's how we get ministers who have fleets of limousines, $70 million private jets. Another term for it is spiritual materialism, which is using spirituality to feed our desires and then ultimately feed the ego. That's not how it's supposed to work. Spirituality is supposed to be an antidote to the kind of desire and attachment that causes so much suffering in the world, the kind of desire and attachment that the ego likes to produce. And that's the point that Eric is trying to make really in this entire book, but specifically in these 2 chapters. Spirituality plus ego equals big trouble. That's the formula. That's the equation. Spirituality plus ego equals big trouble. We all know the stories. All I have to do is say a few names. Jim Jones. Everybody remembers the Jonestown tragedy. How about Marshall Applewhite? That name is not quite as well known, but he had the Heaven's Gate cult that thought that a UFO was coming to pick them all up, and so they killed themselves. David Koresh, the Branch Davidians. And of course, the hijackers on 9/11. They all believed that God was speaking to them, telling them what they were supposed to do, and they believed it. They believed that they were being led by God, and they were so ego-driven that they used spirituality to commit atrocities. Once they convinced themselves that this is what God wanted and that they were the appointed instrument, the debate was over. No reasoning with them. Now, those are admittedly extreme examples, but we see the same thing getting played out on a lesser scale over and over again all around the world. God wants me to have that new car, a new career, jewelry, money, power, you name it. God wants me to be a famous rock star, a lawyer, or maybe even a minister. How about that? Ooh, God wants me to be a minister? Yeah, happens to us too. Tell you what, being up here, talking, it's a very dangerous place to be. It's very seductive. It can feed the ego if you're not careful. Pretty soon you start thinking that you have all the answers, and from there it's a downward spiral into all sorts of self-righteousness and egotism. A few of you might remember Years back, there was this TV preacher by the name of Peter Popoff. Anybody remember the Peter Popoff story? Back in the 80s, something like that, his act was he would stand at the front of a large auditorium and he would have people come down the aisle and he would heal them. But miraculously, he would know their names. He would sometimes even know their address in the street that they lived on. Until a fellow by the name of James Randi came around and discovered that Mr. Popoff had this little thing in his ear, a little receiver, and that his wife was transmitting from a place somewhere outside the auditorium, reading him the names. They recorded her reading the names of the people who were walking up, and of course the guy was busted on national TV. He's back. He's back again. He took a break and he's back again. He's doing a little different shtick, but it's amazing how this becomes insidious. This drive for the bucks, this drive for the fame and what the ego can do to us. So Eric is trying to tell us to stop using our spiritual practices to feed the ego and use them to control the ego instead. And one of the practices that he talks about in spiritual economics to help us to get a little control on the ego is visualization. And I'm sure that a lot of us have heard about this. It became very, very popular a few years ago when that book, The Secret, became so popular, but it's been around for a long, long time. Eric was writing about it during the 80s, and it goes back before that even. Now, the kind of visualization we get from our pop culture, as you might imagine, has to do with getting stuff, cars, and money. Eric has a different take on it. He talks about visualization, and he says we're not talking about seeing things like cars, houses, jobs, jewels, and so forth. He says we are seeing from a consciousness of ever-present substance, which will become the magnetic force that draws the things to you, but without any of them ever becoming the object of your life. That's the key difference between the way Eric talks about visualization and the way we hear about it from so many other sources. Okay, so materialism isn't about just having money and things. Just because you have nice stuff, even a lot of nice stuff, really doesn't necessarily mean you're into materialism. You know, this isn't about finding another way to judge other people, okay? That's the one thing we want to be careful about, because that's just another form of egotism as well. Just because you have nice stuff doesn't mean you're into materialism. The real definition of materialism is that you believe that material things can provide us with everything that we really need, leaving out the intangibles. Think about it. What is it that we really want and need as human beings? That's one of the most important questions that we can ask ourselves. What is it that we really want and need that satisfy our deepest human needs? We want peace of mind, joy, and above all, a sense of meaning, purpose. We want to know that our lives matter. And material stuff can never provide that. So, the problem with using spiritual practices to manifest stuff is that we're shortchanging ourselves. We're focusing on an object and using it to take the place of something that is deeper and more meaningful. The things that we really want can't be quantified or embodied in an object, or even a bunch of objects. And that's why Eric is not a big fan of treasure mapping. Too often the process is totally focused on an object, and then it stops there. That's the issue he's getting at. It stops there. It never reaches the spiritual reality. And there's always a spiritual reality that's underlying or interwoven with the physical world and the physical things that we're seeking in a treasure map. We're looking at that spiritual reality that manifests in the form of the true, the good, and the beautiful. Now, I'm not saying stop doing treasure maps. Neither is Eric. We don't have to stop doing treasure maps, but what if we were to add a step to the process? I want a house. Great. What are the spiritual values that are symbolized by acquiring and owning that house? How will it help me to be a more evolved, loving, and compassionate human being? How will it promote the search for meaning and values? How will it help me to identify with the true, the good, and the beautiful? If we can incorporate those kind of things into the treasure map, it's a lot more powerful because it's a lot more complete. If we don't include those things, we're only visualizing half the picture. And this is another one of those really great philosophical questions. Because when it comes to things in the material world, do we ever see things in the world exactly as they are? Do we ever see the total picture? For example, everyone thinks they see a red tomato up there. But you know what? There isn't anything up there on that screen that is actually red. Red is simply a function of how our eyes work and the brain interpreting that sensory input. We human beings, we can only see light in the visible spectrum. Can you imagine a being whose vision included all of the other frequencies? What might they see up there? Something totally different from what we're looking at, and yet we're still looking at the same image. Do we ever see things exactly as they are? Take a look at the size of the electromagnetic spectrum here, by the way. This little sliver up here, that's all we can see. Look at how broad the entire spectrum is. So, I mean, it's great. We see things that we say are beautiful, and yet it's just a tiny portion of the spectrum, the electromagnetic spectrum. Then there's the matter of perspective. Here's another interesting image. Check this out. I'll let you ponder that for a moment. You see two shadows up there. One shadow is a square. One shadow is a circle. And yet it's one object that's casting those very same shadows. Circle or square? Which one is true? The circle or the square? Well, they're both true. It just depends on which way the light is hitting that cylinder that's causing those shadows to be cast. Perspective. That's what Eric is getting at when he says this. And this is a really important point that he tries to make in this book and his other books, a theme we see a lot. You see things not as they are, but as you are. You bring your entire history of your memories, your preferences, your personality, and then you add to that your position in physical space. Depending on which side of that cylinder you're standing on, somebody will see a square, turn and look the other way, somebody sees a circle. All of those things come together. We see things not as they are, but as we are and where we are. Our perceptions are shaped by our perspective, our history, our genetic makeup, our gender, our physical construction. All of those things get overlaid on top of what we think of as reality, which means that a large part of what we think we're seeing out there is really a reflection of something within us. Now, might make your head spin a little bit. But the really, really good news is that when we understand that, when we're informed that that's how it works, that provides us with a measure of power. Here's something else that Eric tells us. He says, you can decide where you are going to throw the weight of your consciousness, and the welfare of the nation as a whole is determined by the attitude of we, the people. More and more economists are coming to agree that this word economy does not refer to a monolithic entity, but rather to a financial climate chiefly influenced by the collective consciousness of the populace. So we realize what we bring to the table. We realize that what we see out there may not be the total picture. it can make all the difference in the world. Anyone ever look out at the world and see a frightening and fearful place? How about the next day you look out and you see a friendly and loving place? Which one is true? It's an inside job. We can do both. We can see the fearful and frightening place, or we can see the friendly and loving place. So, which one would you rather see? You have a choice. This is what Jesus was getting at when he said that thing it's in the Gospel of John. He says, "Do not judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment." Right judgment means we become aware of the role that consciousness plays in showing us the outer world. Eric says if we live in the belief that our experience is totally dependent on what happens to us, we become tentative. We become cautious, maybe even a little paranoid. Every changing condition has the power to pull our strings, or as some people like to say, push our buttons, right? Visualization is the same as what Jesus means when he said right judgment. Instead of buying into the illusion that we are seeing things all the time exactly as they are, boy, tell it like it is, right? Yeah, like we know that. Instead of buying into the illusion that we're seeing things exactly as they are, we see things as they can be. That's the choice we make. We see things as they can be with the realization that we're bringing other things to play that may not be such a skillful use of consciousness. We choose to see things as they can be, and that starts with maintaining a clear idea of who we are. And according to Eric, the truth of who we are is this. He says, you are a creative person with your own unique relationship with the divine flow. You are always one with the source of boundless ideas, creativity, and success. This is our true image, or as Eric likes to put it, our I-image. That's how that looks up there, except the I got lost, but that's what it looks like. Our image is our I-image. It's what we really are. It's what we've always have been, and we can never be less. So, if it's true that we see the world as we are, and that seems pretty clear by now, doesn't it? If we see the world as we are, then it's crucial that we know and understand who and what we are, which is a big part of the spiritual journey and is one of the major functions of visualization, seeing ourselves as we truly are. Like this cat here doing a self-portrait. I love that. It's a riff on Norman Rockwell. Have you seen that famous Norman Rockwell painting where he's doing, except the cat is doing a self-portrait and sees a tiger. That's great. That's the cat's I-image. Our self-image is that of boundless ideas, creativity, and success. And if we have that self-image, then it means that no matter what's happening in the world, we're always going to see that potential even in the midst of any situation. Now, this isn't about putting on rose-colored glasses. It's about holding on to a greater truth based on a higher consciousness of who we are. Lots of things in this world that we experience that we don't have much control over. Sometimes no control at all. Hey, if we're at home, we're feeling a little cold, well, we can put on a sweater. We can turn up the heat. We can control that. But turmoil in the larger world, that's another story. That's where the real challenge comes into play. We can't just push a button and fix it. Can't put on a sweater. That won't fix it. That's where higher consciousness comes into play. Instead of trying to fix things or to put things right, Eric says we should strive to see things right. Seeing, again, that visualization. We strive to see it right instead of setting it right. We strive to see it right from a higher consciousness of creative possibility and an awareness of our I-image. So, if you like treasure mapping, keep doing it. Keep doing it. Just remember to take the added step of visualizing the underlying spiritual values that the material things represent symbolically. They're always there, but they can get lost in the shuffle. Let's bring them to the forefront and see what happens. And I'll see you next week. Thank you.